News for you, you can't wake up and be Mad Dog Russo. You can't wake up and be Adam Shine. You can't wake up and be Stephen A. It takes work. In the end, we all have people to answer to.
Stephen A. Smith has finally lost his cool, publicly blasting Molly Qerim after she shocked ESPN by inking a massive new deal with NBC Sports. What was supposed to be her biggest career victory has now exploded into a fiery war of words shaking the sports world. Bruised egos, broken trust, and a brewing TV rivalry that could reshape the entire future of sports broadcasting are now on the line. How did things get so toxic so fast? Let's dive into Molly's abrupt exit that rattled ESPN to its foundation. Stephen A. Smith, the same man who once defended Molly fiercely and praised her as his most trusted on-air partner for over a decade, is suddenly unloading on her with no filter. And it's all triggered by her jaw-dropping move to NBC Sports. What looked like a triumphant career leap for Molly has spiraled into one of the nastiest, most scandalous feuds in recent media history.
Molly is somebody that I have leaned on many occasions in the past, as she has done when it comes to me. We've been partners on the show for the last 10 years. And a lot of times, some of these things happen, and it's just uncomfortable to see.
And tonight, we're exposing exactly how their long-standing partnership collapsed into pure bitterness. Why is Stephen A. so furious about Molly's jump to NBC? What hidden industry secrets did ESPN desperately try to bury? This battle is way bigger than just contracts. It's about control, about power, about who really runs the game in sports media. And the most explosive parts are still ahead. The hot mic comments Stephen A. made that he thought would never see daylight. The whispers about Molly's true reasons for leaving ESPN, and the secret leaks about how NBC outbid the so-called worldwide leader in sports. The drama is just getting started. But let's rewind to the exact moment everything blew up, the day Molly Qerim walked away from First Take. Nobody saw it coming. One morning, she was on air, smiling and steering debates like always, and by the very next day, she was gone. No farewell episode, no heartfelt goodbye to the loyal fans, just a cold Instagram story and then silence. On camera, Stephen A. looked rattled, but behind the curtain, insiders claim he wasn't just shaken, he was furious. Furious that the empire he helped build had just lost its face without warning, and even more enraged that ESPN's top brass seemed powerless to stop it. Sources say his anger wasn't just professional, it was personal. The official spin? It was about money, plain and simple. Sports Business Journal reported that Molly turned down a contract extension to explore new opportunities.
She said, out. I was like, wow. So obviously this is pretty obvious. At least from Molly's point of view, I don't think it was the most amicable split.
ESPN's president of content, Burke Magnus, even tried to downplay it, saying, the only surprise was the timing. But let's be real, timing doesn't explain why she bolted overnight like a thief in the night. Timing doesn't explain why Stephen A., a man who constantly brags about fighting for colleagues during tough negotiations, sounded so defensive when pressed if he even tried to keep her at ESPN.
News for you, you can't wake up and be Mad Dog Russo. You can't wake up and be Adam Shine. You can't wake up and be Stephen A. It takes work. In the end, we all have people to answer to.
And timing definitely doesn't explain why NBC stormed in just weeks later, flashing a multi-million-dollar contract that ESPN never stood a chance against. The truth? Molly wasn't just leaving a chair at a desk. She was breaking out of a system where Stephen A. rakes in $20 million a year, while the very moderators who keep his show afloat scrape by with a fraction of that. As one industry insider put it, when you pay Stephen A. Smith $20 million, you set the stage for every co-host to demand way more. And Molly was done playing small in a rigged game. And that's exactly where the resentment started to boil. When ESPN rolled out the red carpet to re-sign Malika Andrews, when Mina Kimes scored a shiny new deal worth nearly $2 million, and when Shannon Sharpe came in with all the hype and fanfare, Molly looked around and thought, Wait a second. I've been here for 10 years. I've carried this show through endless debates, and yet when it's my turn, they lowball me. No grand send-off, no graceful landing, just a cold, brutal exit, what one analyst called an emergency cut. And still, ESPN tried to spin it cute. Burke Magnus told The Athletic that Molly simply wanted to explore other opportunities and her interests just didn't line up with the network anymore. But let's be real, does that sound like the whole story? Here's where it gets messy. If it was only professional, why did Stephen A. jump on his SiriusXM show almost immediately after and start talking about people forgetting they answer to somebody? Notice how he never once says Molly's name, but the subtext is loud and clear. Who else just stormed out of ESPN over contract demands? Who else wanted a bigger platform? Who else dared to challenge the myth that Stephen A. is untouchable? It was Molly, no question. And the more he denies it while hammering the same points, the more obvious it becomes. This wasn't just business. It was deeply personal. And the tension was bleeding through every word. And that brings us straight to NBC. The real twist in this saga. According to multiple reports, Molly already had suitors circling while her ESPN contract was in limbo.
How do I get my bosses more money? How do I get something?
One insider even speculated she must already have a deal lined up. And if that's true, it's got to be with a competitor strong enough to rattle ESPN. Turns out, they were right. And he was right. NBC Sports, desperate to shake up its stale morning lineup and finally go toe-to-toe with ESPN's daily dominance, saw Molly as the golden ticket. A familiar face, proven ratings magnet, and most importantly, someone with the credibility to anchor a network that's been struggling for years to build a personality-driven debate show worth watching.
We don't get to define our own value. We don't get to define our own worth. We don't get to sit there and summarily say, this is who I am and this is what I'm going to do.
Stephen A. knew it too. That's why the very same week Molly's NBC deal leaked, his monologue suddenly shifted into lectures about humility, knowing your place, and understanding your value. But to the audience, it didn't sound wise. It sounded bitter. It sounded like a man blindsided by his own teammate. And honestly, can you blame Molly for making her move?
This was an abrupt landing. This is an emergency exit. This is an emergency landing.
After a decade of cutting through egos, managing chaos on live TV, and being treated like an accessory to Stephen A.'s empire, she finally placed the bet on herself, and NBC backed up the Brinks truck to prove her right. But here's where it gets shocking. NBC didn't just hand her a chair at the table. They handed her power, executive producer credits, cross-platform projects, a chance to launch shows under her own vision.
Am I going to share it with you? No. Because again, that's her story to tell. But I do think it's important that I started off the show by just acknowledging my love and appreciation for her and what she's meant to me and what she's meant to the show.
All things ESPN flat out refused to ever give her. So while Stephen A. ranted on air about how everyone has a boss and you can't define your own value, Molly was already across the table from NBC execs writing her own terms. And that's the exact moment Stephen A. snapped. The public only saw Molly's carefully worded farewell. After much reflection, I've decided it's time to close this incredible chapter and step away from First Take. Hosting this show has been one of the greatest honors of my career. It read as polite, even heartfelt, but insiders swear the real emotions were simmering underneath.
When I look at the abrupt, I'm not coming into work tomorrow.
Yeah.
That also is like, maybe there's pointing the finger at Stephen A. Smith. I mean, you can play it out to the end of the year and move on to your next deal, but when you don't come in, it makes me think maybe Stephen A. is a part of her frustration.
Frustration, anger, years of being sidelined and underpaid. And let's not sugarcoat it. ESPN has a long, messy history of undervaluing its female talent, and Molly finally refused to play that role any longer. Jameli Hill, Kari Champion, Michelle Beadle, one by one, each of these women carried shows, drove ratings, and built ESPN's identity. Yet all of them were pushed out under less than glamorous terms. And now, Molly joins that same list of discarded stars. Meanwhile, Stephen A. Smith continues to sit untouched at the top, ESPN's $20 million man, bragging like a king about how he runs the empire. Stephen A. has openly admitted, practically bragged, that every single morning he wakes up asking just one question: how do I make them money, and how do I grab my share? Notice what's missing. Not, how do I uplift my co-hosts? Not, how do I protect my team? It's all about him. And that's exactly why Molly's exit stings him so badly. By leaving, by signing with NBC, she shattered the system that always kept him in the center of the universe, and you can hear the salt in his voice.
Now, Molly is not Stephen A. Smith. They don't need her as much as they actually need Stephen A.
On his radio show, Stephen A. dressed up Molly's departure as some lesson in humility, as if it was a cautionary tale for the industry. But come on, who else could he be talking about? This wasn't just a general sermon, it was a veiled jab straight at Molly. And here's the irony that exposes the double standard. This is the same Stephen A. who spent years leveraging his own value, holding ESPN's feet to the fire until they made him the highest-paid personality in the building. When he demanded his bag, it was just business. But when Molly dared to push back, suddenly it was ego. The hypocrisy couldn't be louder. Now, let's rewind to the weekend before her dramatic exit. According to Awful Announcing, Sports Business Journal leaked that Molly would be leaving at the end of the year. But then, within just 24 hours, she was gone. Vanished. Insiders didn't call it a farewell. They called it an emergency landing. It was an emergency landing, plain and simple, and the suddenness says it all. You don't just walk off set mid-season, right in the middle of football season, unless something huge is happening behind closed doors. And according to sources, that something was NBC turning up the heat way faster than anyone at ESPN ever expected. Think about it.
And guess what? I don't give a damn what anybody say unless you have the leverage to do it. When you heard me at a time when we were discussing my contract negotiations all over the media and all throughout the sports world, what I talked about was what my worth was based on what the numbers showed. I talked about these are the ratings, this is the revenue.
If Molly's exit had really been amicable, ESPN would have milked it for everything. Farewell montages, dramatic send-offs, boosted ratings. Instead, nothing. No closure, no goodbye. Just Stephen A. being forced to announce it live on air, his voice cracking like a man who'd just been blindsided by his own partner. And listen closely to how he phrased it. That's her story to tell. Translation? He knows the real reason. He knows it wasn't just contracts, but he also knows that if he spoke the truth, it would expose not only ESPN's dysfunction, but maybe even his own role in pushing her out. Which brings us to the whispers swirling louder than ever. Did Molly leave to escape Stephen A. himself? One analyst didn't even sugarcoat it, bluntly saying the quiet part out loud. Maybe she was done living in his shadow. For years, fans speculated about the tension. Molly trying to cut him off when rants ran too long, playing peacekeeper as egos clashed, keeping the chaos under control while Stephen A. steamrolled through debates. But what if that tension finally snapped behind the scenes? What if NBC wasn't just waving money, but offering her something even bigger? A clean slate, a fresh start, far away from Stephen A.'s orbit.
But in the end, she made a decision to walk away from the show effective immediately. As you see from her Instagram post, that story is for her to tell. Do I have an idea? Of course I do. Am I going to share it with you? No. Because again, that's her story to tell.
That would explain the abruptness, the skipped goodbye, and the Instagram farewell that noticeably didn't even mention Stephen A. by name. 10 years side by side, and not a single thank you? Fans noticed, commentators noticed, and Stephen A. definitely noticed. And his response? Not direct, not explicit, but sharp enough to cut. He launched into cryptic lectures about leverage, about having a boss, about knowing your worth. To viewers, it sounded less like wisdom and more like revenge in disguise. Stephen A. used Molly's exit like a warning shot, turning it into a cautionary tale for the industry, basically saying, "See what happens when you overplay your hand?" But in doing so, he exposed himself, Because Stephen A. Smith doesn't waste breath on people who don't threaten him. So why does Molly's NBC deal cut so deep? Because for the first time in years, ESPN's King looks like he's losing control of the story. And that's just scratching the surface. The NBC deal that lit Stephen A's fuse wasn't just about money, it was about power, and ESPN never wanted you to know that. By the time Molly's departure leaked, NBC Sports was already locked into negotiations, offering her things ESPN would never hand over. Here's the inside scoop. ESPN had penciled Molly in for side projects after quietly pulling her from First Take. Translation, they planned to sideline her, maybe a digital series, maybe sideline reporting, but never a marquee platform equal to Stephen A's empire. That's why the contract talks collapsed. ESPN made the usual cold calculation. She's not irreplaceable. She's not Stephen A. One commentator even spelled it out bluntly. Molly is not Stephen A. Smith. They don't need her the same way they need him. But NBC saw something different, and they bet big. Behind closed doors, execs pitched Molly on a radical vision.
It was a contract negotiation that was going on. ESPN certainly did not want to lose her. But in the end, she made a decision to walk away from the show effective immediately, as you see from her Instagram post.
Not just hosting, but shaping programming from the ground up. A brand new flagship morning show designed to rival ESPN's dominance. And, crucially, they sweetened the deal with an executive producer title. That's not just a paycheck. That's leverage. That's ownership. That's real power in an industry that rarely hands it to women. And ESPN never saw it coming. When Sports Business Journal first reported Molly was leaving at the end of the year, insiders say ESPN thought they had time, months to test replacements, months to spin the narrative, months to stage their goodbye. But Molly flipped the script. She pulled the trigger early, walking out before ESPN could control the optics. That single move robbed Stephen A. and ESPN of the polished farewell they desperately wanted to script, and it sent shockwaves through headquarters. The speed with which NBC swooped in confirmed the nightmare. This wasn't just a talent exit, it was a corporate coup. Now here's where Stephen A. stormed back into the spotlight. Publicly, he played the role of the heartbroken colleague, calling Molly a friend, praising her professionalism, wishing her well. But insiders say the act didn't match the reality. Behind closed doors, he was fuming, not just because she left, but because she left in a way that made him look powerless, something he never forgives. Remember, Stephen A. has built his whole image around being the fixer, the guy who brags about saving colleagues' contracts, the man who boasts about calling the shots. And yet one of his closest partners walked away, and he couldn't stop it. That crushed his ego more than anything else. So what did he do? He started slipping cryptic messages into his monologues. Subtle to the casual viewer, but to insiders, it was a clear shot across the bow. Translation, I've got leverage. Molly doesn't. I earned my deal. She didn't. But here's the twist. NBC didn't care about ESPN's hierarchy or Stephen A's inflated sense of power. They cared about optics. They wanted to send a message. If ESPN won't value its talent, we will. And the timing couldn't have been deadlier. ESPN was knee-deep in brutal layoffs, cutting analysts, play-by-play voices, and household names left and right. Meanwhile, Stephen A. strutted around untouched with his monster contract, flaunting his status. The optics? Terrible. And right in the middle of that chaos, Molly walked out. NBC pounced like sharks circling blood in the water. By poaching her, they weren't just hiring a host. They were making a statement, planting one of ESPN's most visible faces right onto their own network as living proof they could compete head-to-head. And here's the irony. ESPN created this whole mess themselves. They lowballed her, undervalued her, and assumed she'd never dare to leave. But NBC didn't just offer Molly a raise. They offered her something ESPN never would. Parody. Not Stephen A. money, but close enough to sting, and structured to grow with ratings, podcasts, and digital expansion. In other words, they handed her the exact opportunities ESPN slammed the door on. And that's the dagger, because now Stephen A. knows Molly walked away with the one thing he can't control, the one thing money can't buy, freedom. But here's where it gets even uglier. Sources claim that in the days right after Molly's shocking exit, ESPN executives scrambled and started feeding Stephen A. talking points like a script. They wanted him to stress that this was her choice, that ESPN never wanted to lose her, and that she'd always be part of the family. And yes, Stephen A. repeated all of that on air, word for word. But fans weren't fooled for a second. They saw through the corporate spin, they heard the vague phrasing, and they picked up on Stephen A.'s forced delivery. Viewers connected the dots. Molly didn't just walk away. She walked into something bigger, and Stephen A. was left stewing because here's the dirty little secret. By signing that NBC deal, Molly didn't just upgrade her career, she cracked Stephen A.'s empire wide open, and no amount of money or carefully scripted monologues can plaster over that crack. When the news of her NBC contract finally dropped, the entire sports media world went into shock. Not because she found another gig, everyone expected that eventually, but because of the size and speed of the deal. NBC didn't hesitate, didn't hedge, didn't test her out with rotating moderators like ESPN planned. They went all in, rolling out the red carpet immediately. Industry insiders whispered that the deal was worth well into 7 figures, stacked with performance bonuses tied to ratings and digital expansion. Translation: Molly isn't just cashing a paycheck, she's betting on herself. If her new show takes off, she gets paid like a franchise star, not just a sidekick. And here's the bombshell that set ESPN on fire. Part of her NBC deal reportedly includes cross-network opportunities, Olympic coverage, NFL features, even late-night TV cameos. That's the kind of exposure that could take Molly from respected sports host to full-blown household name. Compare that to ESPN's so-called offer. A modest raise, some vague side projects, and zero creative control. It's no wonder she ran for the door. ESPN wanted to keep Molly locked in a box, but NBC handed her the keys to the studio. No wonder she walked out without even glancing back. But ESPN didn't take the blow quietly. According to multiple reports, the network scrambled into damage control, launching what insiders called a casting carousel to plug the hole on First Take. Within days, guest moderators were rotating in, Andrews, Taylor, Steele, while execs frantically tested who could handle Stephen A.'s dominance. But the chaos was obvious. Audiences noticed immediately. Without Molly's steady hand, First Take lost its rhythm. The flow was clunky, the energy messy. Stephen A. still dominated, but the balance was gone. And suddenly, the narrative started flipping. Fans who once dragged Molly for interrupting now realized how much she actually held the show together. Without her? Debates spiraled, segments dragged, the glue was gone, and the cracks in ESPN's crown jewel were exposed for everyone to see. Meanwhile, NBC played it like chess. They seized the PR spotlight, positioning Molly not just as a hire, but as a victory. Their press release flexed her decade of experience, her reputation as the ultimate stabilizer, and her bold vision to create something fresh. It was a direct shot at ESPN's pride, and Stephen A. felt it deep. Publicly, he tried to act gracious. He spoke warmly about Molly, said he was sad to see her go. But listen closer and you can hear the sting creeping through every word. That one line, "That story is for her to tell," classic Stephen A. Not outright shade, but a dagger wrapped in velvet. The subtext, "I know the truth, and it's not the story you're hearing." And that's exactly what keeps fueling the speculation. Did Molly leave strictly for the money? For the power NBC dangled? Or was she simply tired of living in Stephen A.'s shadow, playing second fiddle while he bragged about helping others get paid? The timing is damning. Just days before Molly's exit, Stephen A. was on air flexing about his role in securing deals. Then, suddenly, she was gone. Shannon Sharpe, Dan Orlovsky, even Pat McAfee. Stephen A. painted himself as the kingmaker, the man who decides who eats at ESPN's table. No wonder Molly finally walked. But the real gut punch didn't land until later. Off-camera, insiders claim Stephen A. absolutely exploded when he heard the details of Molly's NBC package. And it wasn't the money that burned him, it was the title, executive producer. For a man who has spent decades clawing for control over his own platform, watching a former co-host leapfrog into a producer role at a rival network had to sting like nothing else. especially since ESPN has never given Stephen A. full creative control of First Take. That's why his SiriusXM rant hit like a thunderclap. He wasn't talking about business in general. He was talking about Molly, about leverage lost, about freedom slipping through his fingers. Because the truth is, Stephen A. isn't built to handle losing control. He's ESPN's centerpiece, the face of First Take, the man Disney bends over backwards to protect. And yet here was Molly Qerim breaking free, signing with NBC, and snatching headlines that used to belong only to him. And make no mistake, this feud is far from over. The more NBC builds around Molly, the more it chips away at Stephen A.'s carefully crafted empire. ESPN knows it, NBC knows it, and Stephen A. knows it too. Molly's leap didn't just shake up ESPN, it lit a fuse on a behind-the-scenes war. And here's where it gets even darker. Multiple insiders claim that in the days leading up to her official announcement, Stephen A. was working the phones nonstop. Not just calling ESPN executives, but reaching out to industry contacts, allegedly even trying to gauge or pressure NBC to back off. Now, to be clear, not every detail of those calls can be proven, but the whispers are loud, and one veteran writer even noted the suspicious silence from Stephen A. in the hours after Molly's bombshell news broke, speculating that he was scrambling, frantically trying to contain a fire he never saw coming. But here's the kicker. NBC wasn't flinching. If anything, they were doubling down. Sources say their executives saw Molly as a strategic weapon, a way to chip away at ESPN's monopoly on morning sports talk. With the Olympics, the NFL, and Premier League soccer already in their portfolio, NBC had the rights. They just lacked a personality bold enough to carry a daily debate show. Molly fit that bill perfectly. And when ESPN caught wind that NBC wasn't just hiring her, but building around her, panic set in overnight. You could see it in the chaos on air, as guest moderators were rushed in one after another. One day it was Christine Williamson, the next it was Taylor Rooks. ESPN wasn't in control anymore, they were scrambling. One day it was Malika Andrews, the next it was Elle Duncan. It felt like open auditions, because that's exactly what it was. Meanwhile, NBC wasted no time parading Molly like a trophy. Their press release crowned her one of the most trusted voices in sports television, teased a new era of sports debate, and put her decade at ESPN front and center, turning her resume into a weapon against her old network. That's when Stephen A. snapped. Fans instantly connected the dots. He never said Molly's name directly, but who else fit the description? Who else just defined her own worth by signing a groundbreaking deal with a rival network? It was Molly, and Stephen A.'s frustration was bleeding into public view. But the real fireworks came off camera. Several outlets reported Stephen A. clashed with ESPN brass over how Molly's departure was handled. He allegedly felt blindsided, humiliated that First Take's stability had been undercut without warning. One insider even described him pacing, shouting, demanding answers. And the kicker? Some claim he went so far as to hint at his own future outside ESPN, suggesting that if the network couldn't protect his empire, maybe it was time for him to explore options. Bluff or not, it shows just how deeply Molly's exit rattled him. Here's the irony. Stephen A. has always thrived in chaos, rotating co-hosts, endless arguments, constant clashes. But through it all, Molly was the one constant, the anchor, the peacekeeper, the steady hand. And now, without her, his empire suddenly looks shaky. NBC knows it. That's why they've been teasing Molly's new show will launch head-to-head against First Take. A daily ratings war, Stephen A. versus Molly, live at the same time. Imagine the optics. Viewers flipping channels, social media dissecting clips, headlines crowning winners of the debate wars. It's poetic. The student turned rival. But there's another twist, the part Stephen A. fears the most. NBC isn't just giving Molly airtime. They're giving her crossover appeal. Celebrity interviews, feature specials, even whispers of a primetime project. That's his nightmare scenario. Molly no longer the moderator in his shadow, but his direct competition. And then came the bombshell. Weeks after her deal was announced, a leaked audio clip began to spread online. The authenticity? Still debated, but in it, a voice sounding suspiciously like Stephen A. Vance. She thinks she can do this without me. NBC gonna find out real quick. It's different when you're not sitting across from Stephen A. Smith. You mark my words, They'll regret it. Verified or not, the timing was too perfect. Fans pounced, spreading it across Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, and beyond. The narrative took hold. Stephen A. wasn't just upset, he was bitter. And that bitterness only made Molly stronger. The more shade he throws, the more NBC frames her as trailblazing. The more he insists everyone has a boss, the more Molly shines as the face of independence. This is a PR war Stephen A. simply can't win. And that's why this story matters. It's bigger than one contract or one feud. It's about a power shift in sports media, a shift where so-called moderators refuse to play sidekick anymore, where women aren't just demanding seats at the table, but seizing control of the table itself. Stephen A. Smith slammed Molly Qerim, but in the process, he revealed the truth, that his ESPN empire may not be as unshakable as it looks. And Molly? She's proving that sometimes the boldest move isn't to fight. It's to walk away and build your own. That's it for today's breakdown. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.